All right, people, here she is. By popular demand, I made a video, or I'm making a video regarding some TOK essay tips to kind of walk you through. Now, here's the deal. I looked at some TOK prompts from November 2020. I picked one that I thought was kind of similar in terms of command term and the way it was structured from a lot of the ones that you got. And I started this bad boy at like 2:15. It's currently 2:50. I spent a little bit of time putting pictures and stuff on the slideshow. So this is my work in about half an hour. Okay, so I guess just keep that in mind if it doesn't feel like it's perfect. Okay, I didn't write the whole thing. So first off, a lot of people were asking about the thesis statement. So what should I do for a thesis statement here? If you think about the ones that we read in class, there wasn't really a certifiable thesis statement. I think that's a missed opportunity. It's not going to really affect your score, but it is a missed opportunity because having a good, strong thesis statement is going to set you up for organization purposes, and it helps plant or use some inception in the reader's mind of where you're going to go. So here's the prompt that I took from November 2020. It says reliable knowledge can lack certainty. So right away, actually, let me stop there. I'll just say the quote. Explore this claim with reference to two areas of knowledge. So that's from November 2020. So here is where I'm going to start breaking down the prompt. So I'm going to try to hinge on a couple of words here. The first thing my mind originally went to was reliable, because we talked about reliability as a key knowledge issue in class in a variety of circumstances, whether that be just in general, talked about how that works in human sciences, maybe a little bit in natural sciences as well. Are there reliable ethics? A lot of things to think about. So it's a key knowledge issue. It has to do with how often results or conclusions are achieved under similar circumstances. So maybe even in my introduction, when I'm kind of defining that, I might want to give an example to just demonstrate that I'm worldly and knowledgeable and sophisticated about these things. Also, knowledge in general, like what do we mean by that? How we define it might lead to its reliability or lack thereof. So maybe I'll explore thinking about knowledge as justified true belief, like Plato said, or maybe I'll think more about this idea of having like no defeaters, or what we say is having like true premises as well in your knowledge, and what that means. So that's another thing I can think about. Maybe I won't define it that way in my actual intro, but I'll just kind of think about how do we define knowledge differently in different ways. And then finally, obviously, certainty is kind of important. So I'm going to have some fun with this one. I might discuss doubt a little bit. I might talk about ways of knowing that can lead to certainty, or maybe have less certainty, or I might even think about how certainty can be different within different areas of knowledge, or maybe even different contexts, whether that be culturally or disciplinarily, or just at different times in your life. So there's a variety of things here. Command term, explore is very similar to discuss. So I should be coming up with some various perspectives and take at least some type of stance relatively. It doesn't have to be super strong, but I should have something there. So again, broke down the prompt. It gives me some stuff to talk about in my intro to demonstrate what a great thinker I am in general for the people that are reading this at home. Okay, so let's move on and just start thinking about how do we do a thesis statement for this. Sorry, so here's the basic way of doing a thesis statement. It's called the Carley method. It's sometimes called the Carley method, but it's not actually like my method. I didn't make this up, but I use this a lot, especially good for history, because a lot of times in a history prompt, you're going to have various historical thinking skills. So you might have like a change versus continuity type of question, or a comparison question, similarities and differences, or you might have a cause and effect, or you might have a significance one. So it works out really well. But here's the basic way of doing it. It's, I'll get my pen here. So the idea is X, however, A and B, therefore Y. And here's what they all mean. So the X statement right here is going to be your overarching counterclaim, or your alternative perspective that is different from the one that you are actually going to be focusing most of your argument on. So if it was a history essay and I had like change and continuity, if I think there was more continuity in this time period than change, I would start talking about the continuity first and then talk about the change. Okay, so that's just an example. A is your first reason to support your actual argument. So if I thought there was more change than there was continuity, I would say here's the first change. And then B is the second reason to support your actual argument. So then I would talk about the second area of change in that time period. Maybe there's a third. It doesn't necessarily need to be A and B. You could have a C as well. That's a possibility. You could have a D, E, and F, but you probably want to keep it as limited as possible because you want to have big concepts that you break down within the body of your paragraph than having a bunch of little itty bitty baby ones. And then finally, we've got why. So why is your overall stance using the language of the prompt? And I can't stress this enough. It just demonstrates that you understand the demands of the prompt if you use a lot of the language of the prompt so that they understand. A couple of advantages to this. The first is that it considers various perspectives while also allowing you to take a direct stance. So it's showing that you are automatically at the beginning thinking about different perspectives and how you will use them. It's not like you're just shoehorning or like throwing in a counter argument for the sake of having a counter argument. You actually have it planned into your essay. The other thing it does is it gives you a clear roadmap of how to organize this. You can start your essay out in the body with talking about X, and then go into your A point, and then your B point, and then your C point if you need one, and then eventually conclude and wrap up. So it gives you a good roadmap for how you're going to do this. And the other thing too is by doing it this way, the reader is able to follow along and understand what you're trying to say because they can match it back up with your thesis as long as you stay true to it. So let's workshop this just a little bit. I've got the breakdown over here of the prompt and things I have to do, and then I've got kind of my thinking over here on this side. So first off, one thing I was thinking when I was thinking about this prompt, and again, I literally looked at this today, thought about it for 15 minutes or so, and started doing this. And I'm not trying to like impress you. I just want you to have a little bit of grace if you feel like you don't completely agree with my thoughts here. But the first thing I was thinking was reliability does necessitate at least a degree of certainty, maybe not complete certainty, and I don't even know what that would really look like. So that might be something that I want to think about when I'm writing and I have my real life situations is what does absolute certainty look like? Can you have absolute certainty? Does it look different in different circumstances? So reliability, to me at least, does necessitate at least a degree of certainty. Otherwise, how would you be able to feel like you can replicate something if you don't have at least some certainty? However, I do think that certainty can be developed through different ways of knowing, which can have an impact on reliability. So I do think that the ways of knowing that lead to that certainty or that knowledge can have an impact on how we feel about its reliability and its reliability in general. So that's one point I'm going to argue about, is I'm going to try to bring in some ways of knowing and talk about how some of them can lead to more certainty than others and how that impacts the reliability of that knowledge. So here's the deal. I'm using a TOK concept right here right in my thesis. That's kind of a big deal. It's going to help me stay accountable to what I'm trying to do. I also have reliability, which is ingrained in the question, but that's a knowledge issue as well. So that's kind of important. So, and then the second thing I was thinking about was, well, does reliability and certainty depend on the context in which the knowledge is being created? Maybe in a different discipline, you're going to have different levels of reliability and certainty that are appropriate, or different cultures, or different just general circumstances or different people, things like that. So I had that second point there that I was kind of thinking about that I kind of mushed together for my B statement. And then my why is going to be a little bit of both. So overall, you'll notice one thing, that this thesis statement's pretty long, and that's okay. It doesn't matter that it's longer. It's that it has a succinct point that it's making, and it also develops a roadmap. So don't freak out. I know like a lot of times thesis statements you feel like have to be like one sentence, and it's not necessarily true as long as you're staying focused, especially since we're writing a pretty long essay about this with some pretty big topics. So you're going to have a pretty long explanation about how it's going. So I'll read it to you and I'll just kind of talk about some points here. So the first thing I said was reliability of knowledge does necessitate at least a degree of certainty. Okay, that's my leading argument. I'm actually going to kind of walk it back throughout the essay, but that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm going to kind of drive and pick it apart a little bit later. However, the amount of certainty can be dependent on the ways of knowing in which the knowledge was developed, and reliability is impacted by the knowledge framework of the area of knowledge in which it is created. Again, that knowledge framework right here, I'm bringing in another TOK concept, holding myself accountable to using that in my body of my essay. Therefore, reliable knowledge can lack certainty based on the context in which that knowledge was produced. So I'm using, again, the language of the prompt. I say reliable knowledge. I talk about whether or not it can lack certainty, and then I talk about also areas of knowledge a little bit when I'm mentioning context. So I'm holding myself accountable to this prompt. I'm talking about reliability. I'm talking about certainty. I'm going to talk about two areas of knowledge. Okay, and that's my thesis. So now what I'm going to do now that I have that, it's my working thesis. It might get adjusted as we go, but I'm going to use that and organize my essay that way. If all you needed was help on a thesis statement, you can stop right now. I'm going to go into more about how I would organize the body at this point and use my real life situations. All right, cool, bro. Let's do this. So my first section, and I call it section because it's going to be centered on a knowledge question. So that's how I would organize it, is I would center my all my parts of my essay on the knowledge question it goes with. I should have at least two. You're probably barking up the wrong tree if you have more than two, but you can if you have kind of smaller ones. So my first knowledge question, I didn't write a knowledge question just for the sake of time, but I was thinking more about how, like, let's pick apart this idea of how certainty is developed through various ways of knowing, and let's look at some real life situations. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I had a hard time defining what this really is. It's almost like a thesis for the section. It's the part of my thesis that this section of the essay is going to go with. It's not necessarily a topic sentence in the way you would think like a topic sentence for a paragraph, but it's in there. It's embedded in there somewhere. Either I start with it or I'm going to keep coming back to it at some point. So my big topic sentence was certain ways of knowing lead knowers to feel more certain about their knowledge, which in turn leads to greater reliability. So that's what I'm going to try to prove or explore with this knowledge question and this topic in general. Okay, so I'll kind of lead in. I'll do some, I mean, this is kind of more about the nuance of writing and how pretty and aesthetic you want to make it, but I would probably lead in with some transition statements and get into my first real life situation. So I have to have some kind of claim within this real life situation. So the one I said is I would pick a real life situation that focuses maybe on how emotion and memory have led to knowledge and uncertainty. I might think of one, like I have like a personal one that I was thinking of about my sister's high school graduation and how we utilized memory and emotion related to that to blame my brother for something that he didn't actually do, and just talk about that and maybe extrapolate out some implications. So I said emotion can be difficult to replicate and memory can be fallible. Therefore, these ways of knowing lead to decreased levels of certainty and knowledge, which can lead to a lack of reliability. So I'll kind of talk about that. But here's the key thing, like, it's beautiful to say that, but my real life situation has to actually demonstrate that. So I really have to think about, when I'm doing the knowledge claims of my real life situation, how I am demonstrating this claim, which then demonstrates this topic sentence, which helps answer my knowledge question. So that's where this is extremely important, and this is where students kind of have the hardest time, is make sure that every now and then you're linking back to the knowledge question in the topic sentence. If you've gone a few sentences and you're like, I haven't really talked about how this relates to anything, that's a sign that you should probably include something that specifically says for the reader, like, here's how I'm using this. So you're going to bring it back up over here. And if you can't figure that out, if you go a couple sentences and you're like, I should explain how I'm using this, and you can't figure out how you're using it, then that means that it might be something that needs to get cut out, or it's something that maybe you don't have as much of a grasp on as you think. You might want to get some help from the scribe or myself, or maybe look for a peer that can help you, or think about a different RLS. Okay, the other thing too is we want to think about the impact on the prompt, because we always want to be bringing it back to what the prompt says and how that's helping us. So we don't want to get bogged down with our knowledge question and really just focus on that the entire time, because knowledge questions should be supporting our prompt, but we want to make sure that we're cognizant of the prompt itself and that we're bringing it back. So somewhere, as I'm leading into the next real life situation, I'm going to say a little bit about how it impacts the prompt from this first real life situation, maybe then transition into the second one. So my second real life situation, I'm kind of claiming that in contrast, intuition and reason generally lead to more certainty in knowledge and are typically thought of as more reliable developers of knowledge. And then I'll give another real life situation. And then I kind of was just trying to think of some other little tidbits I could tell you. So maybe in that real life situation, I can think about the knowledge claims of that real life situation. And I'm thinking, you know what? I feel like I have a little bit of self-bias here that comes from my personal experience. And I think I can relate that back to, you know, maybe some issues that are related to using intuition. Like maybe sometimes intuition can also be fallible, but maybe it's less so than emotion and memory. So just kind of demonstrating that as I'm writing this, you know, I'm not trying to cover up or sweep under the rug anything that might go against what I'm saying, that I'm actually actively thinking about it and reasoning through it. Again, link back to the knowledge question in the topic sentence. How does it impact the prompt? And then maybe at the end, this isn't something you need to have, but maybe at the end I'm thinking, you know what? What if every way of knowing is fallible? What if like this whole thing is like maybe not quite right? Because there's a lot of like classic skeptical arguments about like, how do we know we're not brains in vats? Or how do we know this isn't all a computer simulation? Or the things about Gettier cases, as Kristen would say, the sheep incident. So like maybe that's a thing where like you can't be certain even though you're using various ways of knowing. So maybe I just kind of like, this is honestly something I would just like riff on a little bit and kind of be like, I don't have to have a 100% bulletproof counter argument for this, but I would maybe just bring it back and be like, here's something that maybe should be considered. But overall, I think I can say with a fair degree of certainty that, these types of ways of knowing are going to help you with knowledge more so. All right, let's keep her moving. If you haven't heard of Manitowoc Minute and you want to learn more about my Wisconsin culture, check out Manitowoc Minute. Manitowoc, that's an I. AC, minute. Okay, anyway, we'll move on from there. So section 2 is going to be my A and B. You might say, Mr. Carley, why is that not section 2 and 3? It definitely could be. It just depends on how your knowledge questions are being developed. So my knowledge, I'm going to say my second knowledge question is regarding context and different areas of knowledge. So my topic sentence for this one is actually, I just stole it from when I was developing my thesis a little bit. And that's okay. You actually could just cut out that chunk of your thesis and put it in as a topic sentence. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just if you want to be a more nuanced writer, you might want to change the wording around, but that's not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for analysis. So topic sentence here is reliability and certainty can be dependent on the context or area of knowledge in which the knowledge is being developed. So maybe in my first, I know I haven't really hit, maybe I did. Maybe those first couple of real life situations I did have an area of knowledge I looked at, but I haven't really explicitly did it, and that's kind of hinging on this part of the argument. So maybe something about human sciences, or I like history and thinking about certainty within history. So maybe I'll do something related to those and follow the same process I did like I described earlier. And then I should definitely do one to maybe contrast with natural sciences. So I'm going to try to use this, and it really depends on what real life situation you have, but I'm going to try to use this to contrast with my first real life situation regarding reliability and certainty. Maybe I make an argument that there needs to be a greater degree of certainty when knowledge is developed. It needs to be more empirical and observable, and because of the unobservable nature of a lot of human sciences, things get accepted more that are less certain. And then I can maybe talk about that Kahoot we did where we talked about how like only 60% of psychological experiments in the meta-analysis were deemed to be replicable or reliable, and how that wouldn't fly or may not jive in natural sciences. And maybe even when we're thinking about like in the scope of a pandemic, like we probably don't want to have unreliable information related to biology. And then I'll kind of move on to some implications. I think I have a good opportunity here to think about what this means when examining knowledge within human sciences and natural sciences. So like, what does it mean overall? I mean, I've got two specific examples with my real life situations, but maybe I can think about one thing I think about a lot, especially during this current time that we live in, is the intersection of science and politics. So how do we find knowledge in science that can jive with political science and developing policy? So that's an implication. I wouldn't use that as a real life situation necessarily, but I would use it as maybe an implication on the prompt and the importance of certainty and reliability in different areas of knowledge. All right, so we're going to wrap this thing up now. So the first thing I want to do is when I'm writing my conclusions, probably the last thing you do, is I want to ask myself, did I hit all the points on my thesis? So I had my X, I had my A, I had my B, and then the Y kind of goes all the way. But did I hit all of those with a fair amount? Now your X is probably might be the least developed because that's generally like the counter argument. But just make sure that you aren't like short thrifting anything specifically. The other thing I want to think about is, does the argument truly look like my Y point? So in my thesis, I have my Y. If my argument like ends up not really looking like that, then I'm going to either have to hopefully just adjust my Y point a little bit, or in a terrible world, we might need to adjust the paper quite a bit. And then finally, my last thing, and this is just about logical reasoning, which is, do my premises flow into my conclusions? Which means if I have topic sentences and I have claims that I'm making, do I have evidence that flows into that? Okay, it's a little bit different than being deductive. So when we're deductive, we usually have like premise A, premise B, premise C, therefore our conclusion. Okay, here we're kind of writing a topic sentence and then having evidence underneath it. So you're just going to kind of flip that thing upside down. Okay, so you have your topic sentence, and then you want to make sure, do I have a premises or a premises? Do I have another premises? Do I have another premises? Do they seem like they logically flow together? That's pretty much the epitome of argumentative writing. Okay, so like, do I have premises that build my conclusion or support my conclusion? If you need help with that, let me know. That might be like maybe one of the more esoteric things that we'll be working on. And then finally, implications. If I want to do implications, I got to think about what's left for me to think about that I haven't thought about yet or expressed. So I'm just brainstorming right now, to be honest. I thought of some things. The first thing, it seems like there can be reliability without certainty. That's my implication, right? I think that you can have reliable knowledge without necessarily having certainty, but you need to feel at least a degree of certainty and like thinking about what does that look like? How do we measure it? The other thing I was thinking about was we should continue to consider the amount of uncertainty and whether it is appropriate for that area of knowledge, and maybe think of some examples of that. So within an area of knowledge, how do we know what level of uncertainty is inappropriate? We haven't talked about it yet, but in class we'll talk about scientific, well, I have mentioned it before, scientific realism and scientific anti-realism, and one of them feels like there's a certain level of uncertainty that's okay to develop scientific truths. And then the other question is, it goes back to my counterclaim in my very first section, which is the skeptical argument. So like, how do we know whether we are being too skeptical? Like, maybe it makes sense to be skeptical about certain things when they're affecting your knowledge, but probably not like the entire existence of whether or not I'm a brain in a vat, or if I'm going to encounter a Gettier case with sheep in a field all the time. Like, maybe I need to think a little bit more about what level of skepticism is appropriate. So those are ways of doing implications. Implications are a good way to think about it is what is left for me to think about, and what should I maybe express if I have some time. Okay, so hopefully all together that was 21 minutes or so kind of going through this, but I think if you have strong knowledge questions at this point and you can organize a thesis that way, work on it. It takes practice. You're not just going to fluidly write this all out in your head. Some of you might be able to, but I would highly, highly encourage you to brainstorm it and workshop it and work through it, and you're going to be fine. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or bribes. We will talk later, my friends. Peace.